Have you ever made a phone call that shattered your whole world? One millionaire CEO just wanted to fire a cleaner who hadn't shown up for work in days. But when a 6-year-old girl picked up the phone, what she said next left him frozen, shaking, silent, and in tears. Because what he didn't know was, she wasn't just any little girl. She was his own daughter. And he had no idea she existed. Until now. Before we dive into the story, please tell me, where are you watching this from? And what time is it right now? Tell me in the comments. Because what happens next will break your heart, and heal it too. Elijah Grant stood by the tall glass windows of his 48th floor Manhattan office, the skyline sprawling before him like a kingdom he ruled with quiet dignity, yet today, his heart bore an unusual weight. The office buzzed with activity meetings, reports, handshakes, but Elijah's mind kept drifting to the absence no one else seemed to care about, Miss Linda, the cleaner who had silently swept every corner of this empire for 3 straight years without missing a single shift. Now, 7 days had passed, and not a word. At first, he assumed she was sick. On day 2, he asked his assistant to check in. By day 4, concern quietly morphed into agitation. Day 5, her phone remained unreachable. By day 6, staff began whispering, suggesting she'd abandoned her job. By day 7, Elijah, though known for his calm demeanor, was pacing. It wasn't just about missed work, it was the silence that unnerved him, the kind of silence that carries stories no one wants to tell. Linda wasn't just a cleaner. She was the first to greet him with a nod at dawn, the last to leave quietly when the office turned dark. She never spoke much, but her work ethic was unshakable, her presence warm and grounding. His employees threw HR policy at him like paper shields. Let her go, sir. We've left messages. She's not responding. We can't afford slackers in a place like this. But Elijah didn't fire people over whispers or absences. Still, his patience was cracking. He sat at his desk, tapping a pen against a forgotten report, eyes unfocused. He hated when people vanished without a trace. It triggered memories he kept locked away. He opened her file and noticed an old landline number scribbled in faded ink. Strange, he thought. Landlines were fossils in this digital age. But something inside him nudged his hand to pick up the phone. He stared at the digits before dialing, jaw tight, eyes burning with suppressed worry and irritation. The phone rang once. Twice. Then connected with a faint click. He inhaled sharply, prepared to unleash a stern, final warning. But what greeted him wasn't Linda's voice. It was soft, hesitant, so small it barely felt real. Hello? Came the voice of a little girl, barely above a whisper. Elijah froze. The words caught in his throat like ice. A child? At Linda's? Ooh, he managed, tone instantly gentler. Is your mommy there? There was a pause. Then a crack in the girl's voice. Mommy's sleeping. She's very, very sick. She hasn't eaten or drunk anything without my help. Elijah's heart thudded loud in his chest. He sat up straighter, his anger melting into something colder, fear. The girl sniffled. I'm sorry, sir. Mommy didn't mean to make you mad. She talks about you. Says you're kind. Please don't be mad at her. He swallowed hard, suddenly aware that every breath the girl took was soaked in desperation. What's your name, sweetheart? He asked gently, barely able to speak. Clara, she replied, voice cracking. I'm 6. I tried to call someone, but I don't know how to call for help. Mommy said she had to go back to work or we won't eat anymore. The sentence cut through him like a blade. Elijah pressed his palm to his forehead, shaken. He glanced around his lavish office, the marble floors, the polished mahogany, the glittering awards, and felt a wave of disgust. The girl's voice returned. Please don't fire Mommy. I'll clean your office for her. I'll come when Mommy sleeps. I can polish your shoes, wipe your windows. You don't have to pay me full. Even half is okay. Elijah felt like the room was spinning. The sound of traffic below seemed distant, like the hum of another world. He couldn't move, couldn't think. His lips parted, but nothing came out. A part of him wanted to believe this wasn't real, that it was a mistake, a scam, a misunderstanding, but deep inside, he knew, this was no lie. This was a cry from the edge of survival. A little girl begging for mercy, not for herself, but for the woman who raised her. And he had called with the intention to fire her. To punish her. To remove her. Now his own voice betrayed him, his body stiff, eyes glazed. He looked down at his trembling hand still holding the phone, and for the first time in years, Elijah Grant, king of concrete towers, master of calculated decisions, felt completely undone. Elijah's fingers clutched the phone tighter as silence stretched around him like a tightening noose, and the little girl's soft, broken voice echoed through the speaker again, quivering, almost apologizing for existing. "I tried to wake Mommy today, but she was too tired. She said she's sorry for not calling you. Please don't take her job, sir." Her breath hitched between each word like it physically hurt to speak, as if she was holding in a scream she didn't understand. Elijah blinked rapidly, trying to process the wave of anguish spilling from someone so small, someone who had no business bearing so much pain. Every polished corner of his high-rise office suddenly felt suffocating, every framed award on his walls mocking the real meaning of success. "She needs her job, sir. She says you're nice, that you wouldn't be mad. She promised she'd come back when she got better, but she's still sleeping, and I can't wake her properly unless I bring her a cold towel." Elijah's mind flashed with questions. Where's the father? Where are the neighbors? Why is this child managing illness alone? The thought made his heart twist painfully. "I know how to mop, sir," she added timidly, as if auditioning for a kindness he wasn't sure he deserved. "I watch Mommy do it. I can use the shiny spray bottle too. The one that smells like lemons. I'll even be careful with your important things, I promise." The words struck like glass, not because of what she said, but how she said them, with a desperate innocence, with the kind of dignity no 6-year-old should have to summon. Elijah tried to speak, but the lump in his throat betrayed him. For a man used to boardroom wars and cutthroat deals, he found himself completely disarmed by the sincerity of a single child's plea. She paused on the other end, maybe sensing his silence as disapproval. "Please, sir, don't fire her. Mommy said she'd lose everything if she lost this job, and I don't want to lose her too." Elijah slowly rose from his chair, pacing like a man searching for air underwater. This wasn't just about a missed shift or unreturned call, this was life clawing at the edge of dignity. "I tried to make her soup yesterday," Clara whispered, her voice fainter now, as if speaking from inside a dream. "But I spilled it. It burned my foot. I didn't cry though. I wanted to be brave like Mommy. She always says strong girls don't cry." Elijah shut his eyes tightly, his jaw clenched. He had built a life on logic and fairness, but now logic felt cruel, and fairness felt inadequate. "I even cleaned the floor after it fell," she continued, "so it wouldn't be sticky when she walked. I made it smell nice, just like your office." The image was unbearable: a child limping, wiping floors, feeding her unconscious mother while begging a stranger not to end their last hope. Elijah couldn't breathe properly. The city below looked smaller than ever, like a world too big for people like Clara. "And I folded Mommy's uniforms. I didn't want them to get wrinkled. I even hugged them so they could feel warm." Her words were like handwritten notes on his soul, each one stabbing deeper, not with pain, but with a purity he'd forgotten the world could have. "Mommy always says, Mr. Grant is a good man, the kind of man who doesn't forget people like us." His knees nearly buckled. That sentence pierced through years of detachment, carving open a vulnerability he'd buried behind power and polish. "So I believe her, sir. I believe you're still good," Clara whispered, almost like a prayer. "That's why I picked up the phone. I thought maybe if you heard me, you wouldn't be so mad anymore." Elijah finally found breath but not voice. He looked at the phone like it held the ghost of something sacred, something he hadn't known he'd lost until this very moment. The little girl on the other end didn't just reach his ear, she reached the very foundation of who he was. Her words weren't manipulation. They weren't excuses. They were the unfiltered truth of a child who had nothing to offer but honesty and hope. "If you still want to be mad, that's okay," she said finally, her voice trembling like a candle in wind. "You can be mad at me instead of Mommy. I'll try harder. I just don't want her to cry anymore when she wakes up." Elijah's hand trembled, and his lips parted slightly as his heart physically ached. He had called to fire someone, and now he stood on the brink of firing the only thread holding a little girl's world together. His empire meant nothing in that moment. His office, his status, his control, they all fell to their knees before the simple heartbreak of a child's voice begging him to let her mother live with dignity. Elijah stood frozen, the phone still ringing faintly on the floor where it had slipped from his hand. His breathing shallow and uneven as her final words echoed like thunder in a cathedral. She might not survive. The weight of that sentence didn't just sting, it cracked something wide open inside him, something buried for years beneath titles, glass towers, and signed contracts. His fingers twitched at his sides, aching to fix something he couldn't understand, desperate to reach through the line and scoop that little girl from whatever corner of the world she sat in, praying for a mercy he hadn't known he possessed. The walls of his office, once symbols of triumph, now loomed like judges, bearing silent witness to his helplessness. He tried to swallow, but even that hurt. He had stared down hostile mergers, survived boardroom ambushes, made decisions that shaped lives across continents, yet nothing in all his years prepared him for the devastation left by a 6-year-old's plea. His reflection in the glass looked alien, pale, shaken, stripped of his usual composure. Guilt crawled up his spine like ice, spreading into his chest until it squeezed every ounce of air from his lungs. He didn't know what haunted him more, the girl's raw desperation or the fact that he had almost ended their only thread of hope with a single, cold phone call. He stepped back from his desk like it was cursed, the memory of Clara's voice clinging to him like static in his soul. The echo of her trembling tone played on repeat. "You can be mad at me instead." He gripped the edge of the conference table, his knuckles whitening, feeling like the floor might vanish beneath him. Every second that ticked by without him doing something felt like betrayal. He saw flashes in his mind: Linda collapsing alone, the child quietly waiting for her to wake, pressing damp towels to fevered skin, offering to clean polished floors just to save a life. The magnitude of that truth sent a tremor through his spine. What kind of world leaves a child to carry that kind of weight? What kind of man nearly became part of that cruelty? Elijah felt nausea crawl up his throat, not from sickness but from soul-deep shame. His staff had only seen a missing cleaner. But Clara had revealed the truth: a mother on the brink of collapse, a daughter fighting like a soldier in silence, and a system too busy to care. He wiped his face with trembling hands, heart racing with the terrifying realization that a single decision, his decision, could have killed more than just a job, could have taken a mother from a daughter who still believed in kindness. He grabbed his jacket off the chair, ignoring the confused glances from his assistant. He didn't stop to explain. The elevator ride down felt like a free fall into accountability. By the time the doors opened, he was already calling his driver. The address from Linda's emergency file burned into his memory. He couldn't sit still anymore, not after hearing a voice so full of grace beg for the one thing he'd taken for granted: mercy. His heart thudded against his chest, faster with each passing block. His driver noticed the silence, but said nothing. Even he could feel the storm brewing in his employer's stillness. As the city flew past the window, Elijah saw faces in every passerby, wondering how many stories like Clara's went unnoticed, how many lives teetered quietly on the edge of collapse. He wasn't just shaken, he was changed, altered in ways he couldn't yet understand. He wasn't rushing to save an employee, he was racing to find redemption, to apologize without words, to hold together something he didn't even know he'd broken. The car screeched to a stop on a worn-out block, a world away from the skyscrapers he ruled. Elijah stepped out, rain beginning to drizzle like a whisper of grief. The building looked tired, bricks faded, a broken mailbox dangling near the entrance. He climbed the narrow stairs, his breath tight with uncertainty. He didn't know what he'd find behind that door, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't the same man who had picked up the phone. And no matter what happened next, he would never again let silence answer where compassion should have spoken. The hallway smelled of old paint and forgotten lives. As Elijah climbed the narrow stairwell 2 steps at a time, his heart pounding not from the exertion but from the dread twisting in his gut. He hadn't told anyone where he was going, not his assistant, not security. This wasn't a business errand, this was something deeper, something personal. When he reached the apartment door marked 3B, he stood still for a breath, gathering the strength to face what lay beyond it. His hand hovered over the peeling wood, then knocked once lightly before pushing it open, finding it unlocked, a detail that only heightened his concern. The scent of stale air, illness, and something like boiled rice greeted him, mixing with the heavy stillness inside. The room was dim, curtains drawn, the only light coming from a flickering lamp near a sagging sofa, where a frail woman lay sprawled, unmoving. Elijah's eyes landed on her. Miss Linda Polly, sweat clinging to her brow, lips slightly parted as if stuck in mid-sentence. On the floor beside her, kneeling with a soggy cloth in both tiny hands, was Clara, her oversized sweater swallowing her small frame, blue jeans rolled at the ankles, and her blonde hair unbrushed and tangled from worry. She didn't notice him at first. She was focused, pressing the cool cloth gently against her mother's forehead with the kind of tenderness that made his chest ache. Then she looked up. Their eyes met, this piercing blue locked with hers, wide and glassy with exhaustion. She didn't scream or flinch. Instead, she whispered, "You came." And those two words nearly undid him. Elijah dropped to his knees beside them without thinking, his tailored slacks sinking into the threadbare carpet as he reached forward but didn't touch either of them, afraid his presence might break something sacred. "She's really hot," Clara said, voice strained but calm. "I gave her my coldest towel. And water with sugar. That's what the internet said." Her eyes didn't blink, as if any movement might make her mother slip further away. Elijah placed 2 fingers on Linda's wrist. Her pulse was weak, thready, barely there. He felt the gravity of it all settle on him like a crushing weight. His throat tightened. "Have you eaten anything, Clara?" he asked gently, but she shook her head, eyes never leaving her mom. "I tried to make oatmeal. I burned it." She looked down, ashamed, like failure belonged to her. Elijah glanced around and saw a half-washed bowl in the sink, a small pot scorched black, and a spoon lying beside it like a soldier fallen in duty. "She was okay last week. She even danced with me when we finished the cleaning song," Clara whispered, brushing her mother's damp hair aside. Then she said she was tired, but the tired didn't go away. Elijah pressed his hand to Linda's forehead, burning. She was slipping fast, and time was not their friend. He rose suddenly, pulling out his phone and dialing emergency services. "Yes, immediate care needed, adult female, unconscious, high feveries, child is present." He spoke with the precision of urgency, though his voice cracked mid-sentence. Clara clutched her mother's hand tighter, as if afraid strangers would take her away. "Will they be nice to her?" she asked, tears brimming now. "She doesn't like hospitals. She thinks they'll forget her like everyone else did." Elijah crouched again and looked her in the eyes, his voice soft but steady. "They'll help her. And I promise, no one is forgetting her. Not now. Not ever." Clara seemed to believe him. There was something in his tone that didn't exist on the phone. This wasn't the cold man from earlier. This was someone real. Minutes later, flashing red lights painted the cracked walls as EMTs arrived, their calm efficiency a strange contrast to the chaos in Elijah's soul. He watched them work, watched as Clara backed into the corner, hugging her knees, her sweater sleeves soaked with tears and worry. When they lifted Linda onto the stretcher, she moaned faintly, her head lolling to the side. Elijah stepped closer, whispering, "You're going to be okay, Linda. We're going to get you back." Then he turned to Clara. "You're coming too. I'll stay with you the whole time." Her arms wrapped tightly around his leg like he was the only stable thing in her collapsing world. As they rode together in the ambulance, Clara leaned into his side and whispered, "You really are kind. Mommy was right," and for the first time in years, Elijah felt something like purpose ripple through his chestnut, the corporate kind, not built on profits or headlines, but the kind carved from fragile hearts, shaken trust, and moments that can never be planned but change everything. The ambulance's siren sliced through the city night, but inside its cabin, time felt suspended, thick with unspoken prayers and a fear neither of them could name. Elijah sat stiffly on the narrow bench, his hand engulfed by the tiny, trembling fingers of the girl beside him, who hadn't let go since they stepped in. Clara's wide eyes flicked between her mother's unconscious form and the blinking machines monitoring her vitals, her lower lip trembling as if bracing for a goodbye she wasn't ready to give. Elijah glanced down at her hand in his so small, yet gripping with a strength far beyond her years. The warmth of her touch burned through his skin, branding a responsibility he hadn't expected but now couldn't deny. When the paramedic adjusted Linda's Clara whispered, "She's been sleeping too long this time. Last night, she said she saw stars in the ceiling, but we don't have stars in our house." Elijah's chest tightened, a silent war raging inside him. How had the world turned so blind that a child learned to recognize the difference between sleep and something darker? The hospital came into view, sterile and imposing, but to Clara it was a fortress of hope, or perhaps her last one. As the gurney rolled through the emergency doors, Clara clung tighter to Elijah's coat, her voice barely audible. "They won't take her away from me, right? She's all I have." He crouched and looked into her eyes, voice firm but tender. I promise, I won't let anything happen to her, or to you. Inside the ER, fluorescent lights revealed the full fragility of Linda's condition, her cheeks hollow, skin paper, thin, and dark circles etched beneath her eyes like bruises from life itself. Nurses moved swiftly, checking vitals, starting fluids, alerting the attending physician. Elijah stood beside Clara, answering questions the staff threw his way, though he realized he knew almost nothing about Linda's medical history. That realization crushed him. He had known her name, her reliability, her quiet smile, but nothing else. Clara remained silent until they wheeled her mother down the hall, and then she broke. What if she never wakes up? Her voice cracked into pieces. Elijah knelt again, gently wiping a tear from her cheek. Then I'll sit right here and wait until she does. A nurse approached to escort Clara to the waiting room, but she tightened her grip on Elijah's wrist with pleading eyes. Don't leave me here, I don't like rooms with strangers. He nodded to the nurse. She stays with me. And in that instant, he stopped being just a man in a suit and became something more, an anchor in a sea of chaos. Hours passed. Elijah sat with Clara in the corner of a pale blue corridor, a vending machine humming beside them. He bought her a juice box and a sandwich, and she thanked him with a quiet nod, though she only took 2 bites. Mommy doesn't like hospitals, she said suddenly, breaking the silence. Last time, they told her to rest, but she never got better after that. Elijah swallowed hard, unsure how to respond to wisdom that shouldn't belong to a child. A doctor finally emerged, clipboard in hand, expression grave but calm. She's stable for now, he said. Severe dehydration, malnourishment, and high fever from an untreated infection. We'll admit her and start 4 antibiotics immediately. Clara squeezed Elijah's hand so tight it left a mark. Can I see her? She asked, barely above a whisper. The doctor hesitated, then nodded. Inside the room, Linda looked even smaller against the crisp white sheets, wires and tubes surrounding her like tangled threads of hope. Clara climbed onto the chair beside the bed, placing her tiny hand over her mother's. I brought him, Mommy, the kind man you talked about. He came. Elijah stood near the doorway, heart aching, watching the girl pour love into every word. Her bravery humbled him more than any award or headline ever had. He finally approached the bed, lowering himself slowly to her side. Linda, he murmured, you're not alone. I'm here now. Her eyelids fluttered slightly, not fully waking but as if responding to the sound of his voice. Clara looked at him, a tear sliding silently down her cheek. If she goes to heaven, can I stay with you? The question knocked the breath from his lungs. He didn't answer right away. He just reached out, pulled her close, and whispered, you're not going anywhere without me, Clara, I promise. Elijah didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in the hospital chair beside Clara, who had dozed off curled up in his blazer, her tiny hand still wrapped around his pinky finger like it was her only lifeline to safety. The rhythmic beeping of Linda's monitors created a haunting melody, and in that quiet darkness, his mind began to spiral not with stress, but with unsettling familiarity. He couldn't shake it, the color of Clara's eyes. That exact piercing blue, deep as ocean ice, belonged to someone else once, someone whose memory he had buried behind ambition and grief. Clara stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about a dream, and when she turned slightly toward him, her cheek revealed a small dimple that deepened when she smiled, a dimple he had traced with his thumb years ago, on a different face, in a different life. He tried to dismiss the thought as coincidence, fatigue, or some projection of guilt, but the seed of suspicion had already rooted itself deep. The following morning, while Clara colored with the nurse at the window and Linda slept under sedation, Elijah stepped into the hallway to call the hospital administrator and arrange a private room with round-the-clock care. No more delays, no more neglect. But even as he managed the logistics like the CEO he was, something about the child pulled him away from professionalism. She wasn't just another little girl. There was something eerily personal about her presence. When he returned to her side, Clara held up a sketch she had drawn: 3 stick figures, a woman with long brown hair, a man in a blue suit with black hair, and a girl with yellow hair standing in between them holding both hands. It's you, me, and Mommy, she said with a soft smile, but Mommy's still sleeping in this picture. Elijah blinked at the image, startled by the way she had drawn his suit exactly, even the tie design. You remembered all that? He asked gently. She nodded proudly. Mommy always described you when she talked to me about her job. She said you always dressed nice and looked kind in the eyes, not scary like other bosses. That sentence stuck like a knife. She had spoken about him like he was more than a boss, like someone meant to matter. Clara returned to her coloring, and Elijah sat back, the weight in his chest growing heavier by the second. Later that afternoon, while Clara napped on the hospital couch, he flipped through Linda's patient documents, checking next of kin and emergency contacts, and froze when he saw the girl's full name written in block letters. Clara Evelyn Moore. Evelyn. That was his ex-wife's name. No one else knew that name. His heart stuttered in his chest, and a strange chill climbed his spine. It couldn't be. His mind raced back to a hospital room 6 years ago, where his ex-wife had bled out after childbirth complications. She had been told the baby didn't survive. The doctors had said the child was lost, that there was nothing they could do. He had never seen the body. Never held her. Only a birth certificate that never became real. Elijah stood up, pacing the hallway outside the room like a man trying to outrun time. Was this the universe playing some cruel joke? Or had a truth been hidden from him all these years? The idea gripped him violently. He looked through his phone and found an old photograph of his ex-wife, Evelyn, smiling in the sunlight, pregnant, glowing, her eyes so familiar. When he compared them side by side with Clara's face, it was like seeing a ghost. Even the shape of the eyebrows, the tilt of the nose identical. His hands trembled. He needed answers. But Linda was still unconscious, her truth locked in her fragile body. Elijah stepped into the hospital chapel to breathe, the quiet sanctuary pressing heavily against his thoughts. He sat on the wooden pew and buried his face in his hands. If Clara was truly his daughter, he had missed her first steps, her first words, her first day of school. He had missed everything, and if she wasn't, why did his heart already feel like she was? He stared at the flickering candle beside the altar and whispered into the silence, "Tell me what I'm supposed to do." But no voice answered, only the echo of a little girl calling him kind, and a past unraveling faster than he could control. When he returned to the room, Clara was awake and waiting for him with a question that tightened his throat. "Did Mommy tell you my middle name?" He sat beside her slowly. "No, but I saw it. Evelyn, right?" Clara nodded. "She said I'm named after her best friend who went away a long time ago. I always wondered if that was my real mommy." Elijah felt the room tilt slightly. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Clara tilted her head. "Well, I don't look like Mommy. People always say I look like someone else. But Mommy said it doesn't matter because love makes a real family, not faces." Elijah's heart cracked into fragments, and for the first time in years, his vision blurred from tears he didn't fight. Something buried was waking, and it had Clara's name written all over it. The sound of shifting bedsheets pulled Elijah from his spiraling thoughts, and when he looked up, Linda's eyes were open, bloodshot, dazed, but aware. She blinked slowly, her lips parting as if trying to figure out if she was still dreaming. For a second, neither of them spoke. It was the kind of silence that thundered. She struggled to sit up, confused by the hospital lights, the wires, the beeping, until her gaze landed on him. Her eyes widened. "Mr. Grant?" she croaked, panic flickering beneath the exhaustion in her voice. Elijah stood slowly from the chair, his features unreadable, but his hands clenched tightly by his sides. "You're awake," he said softly, but there was something stormy under the calm. "Clara's okay. She's outside with the nurse. She hasn't left your side for days." Linda exhaled, a tear instantly forming. "Thank God," she whispered, emotion flooding her face. But Elijah stepped closer, eyes narrowing, voice lower now. "We need to talk." Linda looked away, as if trying to climb back into unconsciousness. "Not now," she muttered. "Please." But he was already pulling something from his wallet, a weathered photo, edges curled from years of being carried and never forgotten. He held it up. It was a photo of Evelyn, his ex-wife, smiling in a field of daisies, hair caught mid-blow, her hand on her round stomach. "You knew her," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "didn't you?" Linda stared at the image as if it burned her. Her bottom lip trembled, and her throat bobbed hard. I didn't mean for this to happen," she murmured, eyes misting. "Then explain it," he demanded, no longer angry, just desperate. "Explain why my daughter is alive, living in poverty, thinking I'm a stranger." Linda closed her eyes, a wave of guilt crashing over her entire frame. She made me promise, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Evelyn. She was dying, Elijah. I was there. Her voice shook as she clutched her chest, the weight of the secret too heavy to hold any longer. The doctors had left the room. They thought the baby wouldn't make it either. But she cried. Clara cried. And Evelyn. She looked at me with those terrified eyes and begged me to save her daughter. She said, don't let her grow up in a cage of guilt. Not around lawyers and tabloids and blood money. Let her live where love is real. Promise me, Linda. Elijah staggered back slightly, as if struck. His hand covered his mouth. His knees weakened beneath the truth he never imagined. So you took her? He asked, the words barely audible. Linda nodded, tears streaming freely now. I quit my job at the hospital. Moved across the state. Changed my name. I gave up everything to protect her because that's what Evelyn wanted. She didn't want her daughter dragged into a cold empire. She wanted her to feel love, not headlines. Elijah's eyes burned, a storm warring in his chest. Betrayal, grief, wonder, and the unbearable pain of lost years. And you never thought to tell me? He asked, each word heavy. Never thought I deserved to know? Linda sobbed harder, her breath hitching. I watched you spiral after Evelyn died. The alcohol, the press, the lawsuits. You were broken, Elijah. I thought, maybe Clara was safer without all that noise. He turned away briefly, his fists clenched so tightly they trembled. You had no right, he whispered. No right to choose that for me. She's mine. She's hers, Linda whispered. Evelyn's. I was just the bridge she trusted when the world collapsed. Elijah's chest rose and fell rapidly, his heart torn between rage and the crushing beauty of the sacrifice Linda made. She called me kind, he finally said, eyes glassy. She thought I was a good man. That little girl begged me not to fire you. She was willing to scrub my floors just to keep you safe, and all this time, I had no idea she was mine. Linda looked away, silent. The beeping of the heart monitor grew louder between them. So what now? She finally whispered, fragile. What happens now that the truth is out? Elijah lowered the photo, his hand shaking. Now, I make up for every second I've lost. Now, I become the father I was never given the chance to be. Elijah stood there, the words. She's mine, still echoing in the stale hospital air, but now transformed into something far more than a declaration. It was a realization that rewrote every corner of his past, every lonely evening, every missed milestone. His chest rose and fell in uneven waves as Linda's sobs quieted behind him, but inside him, the storm only grew louder. He couldn't breathe for a moment, not from pain, but from the staggering weight of everything lost and suddenly found. Clara. His daughter. The little girl who had wiped her mother's fevered brow and offered to clean his office for half a salary, was his own blood. And he had almost dismissed her, almost punished her for something neither of them understood. The thought tore through him like glass. His knees gave slightly beneath him, and he braced himself against the edge of the bed, the reality almost too big to hold. His mind flashed with 1,000 moments he never had: her first steps, her first word, her first day of school. He wasn't there. He didn't tuck her in, didn't kiss her scrapes, didn't see her smile when she discovered rain or cried when the power went out. How could life be so cruel to take that from him and so gentle to give it back now? He turned slowly, heart pounding, and stepped into the hallway, searching with frantic eyes until they landed on a small frame seated in the waiting chair, swinging her legs, doodling on a napkin with a pen she'd borrowed from the nurse. Clara looked up and beamed when she saw him. That smile so wide, so pure, it split him open. He approached slowly, as if afraid she might disappear if he moved too fast. Hey, Mr. Grant, she chirped, oblivious to the avalanche of truth heading her way. Elijah knelt down in front of her, eyes brimming. His voice came out hoarse. Clara. She tilted her head, confused by the way he said her name, like it carried an entire lifetime inside it. He tried to steady himself, but the dam broke. A tear slipped down his cheek. I don't even know how to tell you this, he whispered. But I need you to listen carefully, sweetheart. She put her pen down, eyes widening. Okay. He reached into his wallet and pulled out the old photo again, the one of Evelyn glowing in that field of daisies, love in her eyes and life in her belly. Do you know who this is? He asked gently. Clara leaned in, then nodded slowly. That's the lady from Mommy's stories. She said I was named after her. Her best friend who went to heaven. Elijah's lips quivered. That's Evelyn. She was my wife, and she was your mother. The room went still. Clara blinked, her mouth parting slightly. But, Mommy is. He took her hands into his trembling palms. Linda raised you. She loved you. She saved you. But I'm your real daddy, Clara. You're my daughter. And I had no idea until today. Her breath caught. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then, in a fragile whisper, You're my daddy? Elijah nodded, unable to say anything more. His voice was a prisoner of his emotions. Clara stared at him, searching his face like it was a puzzle she never thought she'd solve. Then, quietly, as tears filled her bright blue eyes, she leaned forward and wrapped her tiny arms around his neck. I knew you were kind, she whispered into his shoulder. Mommy said my daddy would be kind. Elijah held her like he'd never held anything before, tight, careful, reverent. She was no longer just a little girl in need, she was a piece of his soul he'd forgotten existed. His hands gently cradled her head, his body rocking slightly as if trying to protect her from every wrong this world had thrown her way. I'm so sorry I wasn't there, he whispered. I'm sorry you had to be so strong. But I'm here now. And I'm never letting go. She pulled back slightly, tears on her cheeks, but her smile was the sun breaking through. Can I still call her Mommy? She asked, glancing toward Linda's door. Elijah nodded instantly. Of course. She'll always be your mommy. And I'll be your daddy. You get two hearts now. Clara giggled softly and hugged him again, this time tighter. The ache in Elijah's chest melted into something softer, a beginning. Not perfect. Not easy. But real. For the first time in years, he felt whole. Elijah never imagined that a child's laughter could echo so deeply through a mansion once built for silence, but now every hallway, once filled only with shadows and whispers of business calls, danced with the bright sound of Clara's giggles as she explored her new world. It began slowly on that first day home from the hospital, when Clara tiptoed across the marble floors like she was afraid they might disappear. Her eyes sparkled as she touched the grand staircase, the chandelier, the velvet curtains, like a princess in a palace she didn't believe belonged to her. But Elijah bent to her level, took her tiny hand, and said, This isn't just a house, it's your home now. In those words, something unspoken settled in her heart. Linda, still recovering but stronger every day, watched from the guest room. Elijah had transformed into a peaceful sanctuary for her, a warm bed, fresh flowers, shelves of books, and more care than she had received in years. Though her body was weak, her soul looked lighter, her eyes often brimming with quiet gratitude when she saw Clara curled up beside Elijah on the couch, coloring while he read stories aloud, his voice stumbling through children's books he'd never practiced but now cherished. Each night, Clara would run into his arms with a sketch, proudly showing off her latest drawing, stick figures of a man with bright blue eyes and a girl with golden curls, beneath captions like Me and My Daddy or Our Happy House. Elijah framed the first one and hung it in his office, replacing a cold landscape painting he never liked anyway. Linda smiled when she saw it, her fingers brushing the glass gently, as if touching proof that her sacrifice had bloomed into something beautiful. Elijah took time off from work not to escape, but to catch up on the 6 years he had missed. He took Clara to the zoo, the museum, the park, laughing when she insisted on naming a baby giraffe Mr. Long-necked Elijah. He packed school lunches, learned how to braid her hair, poorly, and even let her paint his nails once, laughing as she told him real daddies say yes to glitter. At night, she insisted on falling asleep with his watch under her pillow, saying, If I keep time close, maybe it won't run away again. The maids wept quietly behind corners when they saw Elijah lying beside Clara on the floor, helping her build cardboard castles or spinning slowly in the living room to music from an old record player. Both of them barefoot and laughing like time had never been lost. One morning, Linda stood beside Elijah on the balcony, both sipping tea, watching Clara draw on the patio. You're a good father, she whispered. Elijah looked at her, eyes soft. You gave me the chance to be one. Linda nodded, her voice cracking. She saved me as much as I saved her. But I always knew, you were the piece missing in her story. He didn't speak, just watched Clara hold up her drawing, this time of 3 figures, a mommy, a daddy, and a girl in the middle, all holding hands beneath a sun with a heart in it. We're a family now, Clara called proudly, and Elijah smiled, the kind of smile that had nothing to do with power or money. Later that evening, Clara placed her newest masterpiece on the fridge and asked, "Daddy, do you think Mommy in heaven sees us?" Elijah knelt and kissed her forehead. "I know she does. And I think she's smiling every time you laugh." Clara beamed, then tugged him by the hand toward the living room. "Come on, we have a tea party to host, and Mr. Bear says you're late." And as Elijah followed her, wearing a child-sized tiara she had placed on his head, he realized that his once empty home was now filled with something no wealth could buy. Forgiveness, love, and the laughter of a daughter who had waited her whole life to be found. The press conference hall shimmered under crystal chandeliers, crowded with flashing cameras, news anchors, and business elites expecting another corporate announcement, but what unfolded was something no headline could predict. Elijah Grant stood behind the podium in a sharp navy suit, but there was a rawness to his face, a visible tremble in his hands that spoke not of fear, but of a man forever changed. At his side stood Clara, dressed in a simple pale yellow dress with a ribbon in her hair, clutching his hand like it was her anchor to a world she was still learning to trust. Linda, seated in the front row, her face pale but peaceful, watched with tearful pride as the man she once feared would never know his truth now stood ready to share it with the world. Elijah cleared his throat, his voice thick as he began. "For years, I believed I had everything: wealth, success, a name people respected, but I was wrong. I had nothing. I was empty. Because I didn't have her." He looked down at Clara, his thumb brushing the back of her tiny hand as she looked up at him with trust that outshone the brightest camera flash. This little girl changed everything, not with contracts, not with strategy, but with honesty, with love, with the courage to say, "Please don't fire my mommy." The room fell silent, press frozen in surprise, hearts tightening as the weight of his words settled. Elijah continued. "Today, I stand before you to introduce the Evelyn Grace Foundation, named after my late wife, to honor two women, the one who gave Clara life, and the one who gave her a future." Linda lowered her face into her hands, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs as the crowd erupted into soft applause. Elijah raised a hand to calm the room. "This foundation will offer housing, healthcare, and education to single mothers and children who've been abandoned, ignored, or silenced. No mother should collapse from hunger while trying to hold her child's hand. No child should believe she must scrub floors to keep the lights on." He paused, then turned to look at Clara fully. "And no father should be blind to the miracle he was blessed with." The camera zoomed in as tears glistened in his eyes, one finally escaping down his cheek as he whispered, "All this time, I thought I lost everything, but in one broken call, I found my whole world." Clara's grip tightened, her head resting gently against his side. In that moment, time seemed to freeze, not in pain, but in peace. One by one, reporters lowered their microphones, no longer chasing a scoop but witnessing something sacred. After the conference, Elijah took Clara's hand and led her through the back garden of the mansion now blooming with life. They paused beneath the oak tree where Clara had once drawn chalk hearts on the pavement. "Do you think Mommy would be proud?" she asked, looking up. Elijah knelt to her level, cupping her face with trembling hands. "She'd be over the moon, sweetheart. She'd say you are the brightest star in her sky." Clara smiled and reached into her pocket, pulling out a folded note. "I wrote something," she said shyly. "I didn't know if I should give it to you or her." He unfolded the paper carefully. In crayon letters, it read, "Thank you, Mommy in heaven, for sending me Daddy. I found him like you said I would. I promise to take care of him now." Elijah's heart shattered all over again, not in grief this time, but in overwhelming, soul-deep love. He pulled her into his arms and whispered, "You already are, my little miracle." That night, the mansion lights stayed on longer than usual. Laughter echoed through its once lonely halls. Elijah tucked Clara into bed, kissed her forehead, and whispered a bedtime story not from a book but from their own journey. In Linda's room, a photo of Evelyn now rested beside a framed drawing titled "My Family," and somewhere far beyond the stars, perhaps a mother watched her daughter sleep safe, loved, and no longer alone. The man who once chased power now lived for bedtime hugs, messy crayon drawings, and one soft voice calling him, Daddy. And as the moonlight touched the windows of a home once built of walls, but now filled with hearts, the story of Elijah and Clara came full circle, not with an ending, but with a beginning born from love, sacrifice, and the smallest voice that changed everything.